and he is briefing generals. So I got booted and then I was trying to work out of our ADU, but the internet doesn't work. So I'm in the garage on the treadmill. I figured I'd multitask and a group of mayors wouldn't mind. And if someone has a connection at Peloton, because like for the life of me, how have they not integrated Zoom into the Peloton screens? Like, I just feel like that's a huge miss.
Send it into them, get paid for it.
I
Really good
know.
point. Yeah.
Well, you know, I am a mayor. I'm an idea generating factory after all. So
That, use the 10 million to, bridge the gap in the city's budget. What did you get from it?
nothing. 4 more years. That's what I got from it.
So,
No good deed goes unpunished.
Yep.
so Chair, I was just going to ask, I think Councillor Dunwell is on for Wilsonville. Are you actually going to be sitting in today?
Yes, the mayor had me come in as alternate. She's unavailable today.
Excellent. All right, we'll get you
I
promoted
will
up.
be off camera. Just FYI, I will be off camera though.
Okay, excellent. We'll get you promoted to a panelist. Oh, okay. Yeah, happening now. All right, just giving a quick final look here.
I think Kim is, are you in for Tim, Kim?
Kim is in for Tim. Correct.
All right. Excellent. Well, we have a quorum, Chair, if you're ready to get going.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the July 15th, 2024 Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting. I'll go ahead and start off on item number 1, public comment. Stephen, do we have anyone in Zoom who'd like to speak to the Coordinating Committee?
We didn't have anyone who signed up in advance, but if there are members in the attendees who wanted to make a comment to the committee, I'll give you just a minute to raise your hand virtually. And I'm not seeing any hands.
All right, that moves us to item number 2, introductions and roll call. I see we have, like Steve mentioned, Councilor Dunwell is substituting for Mayor Fitzgerald. And Council President right now, Kim, for you, Council President Young is in for Tim. With that, let's go ahead and do the roll.
Great, I will do that now, and we'll go in alphabetical order by city as per usual. So for Banks, Mayor Jones.
Here. We're just an easily amused group today, I've noticed.
Indeed. All right, Mayor Beatty for Beaverton. I saw you were here. Thank you. For Cornelius, Mayor Delane. You're
Present.
on. Thank you. Let's see. For Durham, Mayor Jinke. I don't believe I've seen him, but we'll keep an eye out. For Forest Grove, Mayor Wenzel.
Here.
Thank you. City of Hillsborough, Mayor Callaway.
Here.
Thank you. For City of King City, Mayor Thompson.
Here.
Thank you. City of North Plains, Mayor Linehan.
Here.
Thank you. For City of Sherwood, we have Council President Young.
Here.
Thank you. City of Tigard, Mayor Liu. Thank you. City of Tualatin, Mayor Bubenik.
Present.
Sure. Thank you. For City of Wilsonville, we had Councilor Dunwell.
Here.
Thank you. And for Washington County, Commissioner Fye.
Present.
Thank you. All right. For our non-voting members, I did see Councilor Rosenthal from Metro.
Yes, I'm here.
And I think we have Stephanie Turner for ODOT.
Yep, here.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And for TriMet, John Sarah.
Here.
Excellent. Okay. Unless I've missed anyone, I think that concludes the roll call.
All right, thanks, Stephen. That brings us to action items. Item 3A is consideration of the WCCC meeting summary for June 17th, 2024. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any corrections that are needed? Seeing no hands, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
How about a second? All right. I have a motion and a second to approve the WCCC meeting summary for June 17, 2024. Any discussions on those motions? Those in favor say aye and raise your hands, please. Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Sounds like it's
I'm
unanimous.
abstaining. Sorry, I'm abstaining. This is Mayor Thompson from Twin City. I was unable to attend that meeting.
Okay. That brings us to 3B, MSTIP Opportunity Fund Expenditure Request. Diami, we'd be doing presentation on the MSTIP Opportunity Fund Expenditure Request. After his presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions and or comments. Diami, you're up.
Great, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity here. Diami Valentine, Principal Transportation Planner with Washington County, and presenting on the MSTIP Opportunity Fund requests. I did just note that there were some attachments that were missing in the packet, so I apologize for that. So there are 4 requests for your consideration, and I can walk through. Let me just do a quick screen share to share what was added or missing from your packet. So we had four requests, one from the city of Forest Grove for Safe Routes to School construction grant funding. If you can see this, it is a sidewalk infill along Oregon 8, so TB Highway, at Mountain View, as well as a railroad crossing at Mountain View. And that project is intended to, let's see, are we seeing? Okay, sorry about that. So it's a total project cost of 1.6 million. This does qualify for a reduced match amount. So the total request here is for 164,000 from MSTIP Opportunity Fund. And then Washington County is submitting 3 proposals, all within the Beaverton School District, that reflects priorities that were through a safe school project study that was conducted by Washington County, as well as identified through the Beaverton School District's safety action plans. And let's see if those, we do have a map that illustrates those improvements. These are items that were included in the packet, or should have been included in the packet, showing those missing sections in Forest Grove and Washington County's request forthcoming here. Apologies. So these are the locations: sidewalk infill on Ecole Avenue, 175th Avenue, as well as a mid-block pedestrian crossing at Trolls Ferry and Laurelwood Avenue. And that total project request is approximately a little over 400,000 for those 3 projects. All of them but one qualify for a reduced match amount as well, because of those projects being in proximity to Title I schools. So the total MSTIP Opportunity Fund request amount for your consideration is 531,360, and that would leverage over 4.5 million from the state. And that really remaining balance of the MSTIP Opportunity Fund, if all grants were awarded, would be just under 10 million. So I will stop sharing and take any questions at this time.
Questions for Diami? Mayor Callaway.
Thanks, Chair. And again, not so much a question, although I can make it into a question if you want. But when I see that this is going to protect kids, when I see that we're basically getting a 9 or 10 to 1 return on the MSTIP investments, this is exactly why MSTIP should be protected, because we are not talking about widening highways. We're talking about letting little kids get to and from school safely in areas where infrastructure obviously is not built out to support the needs. So I hope that, and it's not lost that, as Washington County cuts MSTIP, they're requesting 3 of the 4 projects. So I just want to make sure that folks are continue to be vigilant and protective of this important, valuable resource. Okay, there's the question. Are you with me?
Yes. Other questions or comments for Deami? All right. Mayor Lanahan.
So if is this an approval sort of package? I guess I need clarification. Will we be approving all of these 4 in one bundle?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, does the coordinating committee wish to approve this? Do we have a motion?
Yeah, Chair, I move that we approve this bundle.
Right.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the MSTIP Opportunity Fund request. Any discussions on these motions? All those in favor say aye and raise your hands, please. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? I hear none. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the fund request is approved unanimously. All right, that brings us to section 4 of our agenda. 4A is the 2024 Metro Urban Growth Report, an assessment of employment land in the Sherwood West proposal. And this will be led by Aaron Key, Ted Reed, and David Tetrick of Metro to let us know what's going on in the Sherwood UGB expansion in terms of employment lands. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Key, Urban Policy and Development Manager at Metro in our planning department. I am Ted's manager, and I said he could have a vacation day today, so I'm going to go without him. My apologies if I can't answer a very specific question. I will certainly get back to you if I can't. And then do we have David Tetrick? Is he in the room?
Just like, Sam, Katie, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, or I have a question just because I read this in the packet and I'm trying to wrap my mind around why WCCC is having this presentation today. And what does this have to do with our overall appetite as I'm just having a hard time understanding why this is in front of us. So I have a hard time. I want to be prepared and I want to engage, but I lack to see why this is a WCCC topic. Can someone help me out with that?
Part of it is under the WCCC. Land use is also under our umbrella, and I think that's why we're looking at this. And in addition to our transportation, this is a land use issue in our area. That's how it's been presented to me. Is that
to you? The Metro Council will be making an urban growth boundary decision by the end of 2024, excuse me, so December of this year. We've come to WCC before to give you periodic updates on the analysis that goes into that decision. And this is the last of those update informational sessions, so that when you now have access to our urban growth report, which is a full report that brings all of this analysis together, and that is a decision-making tool for the Metro Council. That's something now that you have access to, and I hope that this information will just help you digest that information when you get it, and help you weigh in on this important regional decision.
Is that satisfactory, Mayor Beatty?
No, but I get it. I just think that.
Okay.
What are you asking us to do here? Just absorb the information? This is not a regional decision. Like you say, regional decision.
Yeah, here, let me go ahead and let me get into some slides here because I think it'll help me explain. So can you go to the next slide, which had a schedule? So we're not asking anything of WCC today. I'm here to, again, give you a periodic update to help lead into this next phase of decision making, in which it will be important that you have the opportunity to weigh in on this urban growth boundary decision that the Metro Council will make in December of this year. So you can see that final decision being on this in the orange color at the very end of this timeline. That's the final decision. We're at a inflection point right now, moving between the navy blue and the orange on this line. We're transitioning from the collection of data and information to inform the decision and the actual policy discussions that happen over the next several months leading into the Metro's final decision. The information that feeds into that decision includes city proposals for expansions, and there's one city proposal. It's from the city of Sherwood. That is discussed and is part of the urban growth report, as is all of this information you see in navy blue, different kind of forecasts and information about what's coming, both understanding the demand for land in the future for the next 20 years and the capacity within the growth boundary to absorb that need. It's kind of the basis of the analysis that we've been doing, and that is published in the urban growth report. That report is now available on Metro's website. And I can make sure that you get that website link emailed to you after this presentation. So we're at a critical time. MPAC is going to weigh in on this by making a recommendation to the Metro Council about a UGB decision that's scheduled right now in September. So that is an important place for involvement and participation. Go to the next slide and I'll give you some specific dates. The UGR was published last week, and that kicks off a public comment period, which runs until August 22nd. That's 45 days. Council had a work session on the day that we kicked off. We'll publish the urban growth report. MTAC will be talking about it this week, and MPAC will be getting an overview of the urban growth report, which includes the information I'm going to dig into today at their meeting later this month. That discussion will continue in August. In August, the next thing you can expect is a recommendation from Metro's Chief Operating Officer that the urban growth report does not include an answer about whether the boundary should be expanded or not. Instead, it provides data and information as a tool for decision makers. It provides ranges of data, ranges of growth and capacity that allow decision makers to decide within that available information what the right choice is about expanding the boundary or not. So the COO recommendation will include a recommendation for folks to respond to, and that will be the subject of conversation at both MTAC and MPAC at the end of August going into September. And then decision making happens, recommendations coming from MPAC, as I said, on September 25th. And council holding a first public hearing on the recommendation from Metro COO on September 26th. So those are opportunities to participate in this decision and to share information, your thoughts and ideas about the analysis. I'm here just to feed you a little bit more information about the analysis like we have been in months past, and allow you to ask some questions of me and my staff about that information before we head into these upcoming meetings of MPAC and the Metro Council. Next slide. So that information is specific to employment land. We, of course, look at housing land and employment land as part of this decision. I'm going to focus on employment land first so that you can understand the results of our analysis. And I'm going to start first with capacity. So if you could go to the next slide. I've got a series of maps here that begin to give you a sense of the capacity of commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoned land inside the urban growth boundary. The size of these circles relates to the acres available, and you can see the way many of these cluster, particularly in industrial. That blue color you can see is the industrially zoned land that is vacant in the region. So that's absolutely nothing's built on it, not even a parking lot. If you go to the next slide, you can begin to see maps of, this is focused again, in same colors, industrial is in blue, commercial in red, and mixed use in purple. This is infill. So an example of infill would be an area where there is vacant land near existing development. So there's space on the property for new development. Many cases we have industrial properties that maybe have another lot that they keep vacant for future needs. This would count into that. And my third map to show you is about redevelopment. So next slide. So these are areas that we've identified as redevelopable land, employment land. You see commercial standing out a lot more in this map. Commercial is in red, mixed use is purple, and again, blue is industrial. And you see far more showing up there in the Portland area along the river with opportunity for redevelopment, much less of that in the outskirts, although there's some in the Happy Valley area and Oregon City. Next slide. Okay, so overall, we totaled up the number of acres. So these are buildable acres inside the urban growth boundary to understand what capacity we have for future development. You can see again, the vacant infill redevelopment. Those are the three different maps that I just showed you. And the industrial and commercial land that's available. So we do have capacity inside the growth boundary for a total of 5,950 industrial acres and 481 for commercial. Next slide. So the next part of this, we're looking inside the growth boundary. This is about our demand. So what the requirement of state law is that we look forward 20 years to understand the needs for 20 years in order to accommodate that growth. So let's go to the next slide. It started with a regional 7-county metropolitan service area look at employment growth potential for the next 20 years. And we looked at that by sector. And then this is kind of a process that we take to figure out this starts with number of jobs. So we do an estimation of the regional employment forecast by number of jobs. And this sort of just takes you through how we move from number of jobs into acres demanded to accommodate those jobs. Because obviously it depends a lot on the type of job. Different jobs occur in different size buildings that take up different land demand. So we need to understand what the growth in different industries are so we can understand what is likely to happen in the next 20 years in terms of that demand for buildings and what type of buildings. So this is that process. Your cities and counties use a nearly identical process in developing your employment opportunities analyses. We look at historic UGB capture rates by sector. That's how we move from a 7-county regional forecast to what we think of that 7-county, what of it is going to tend to land inside our urban growth boundary. We base that on historic numbers and estimate the future based on what it has been historically. And then we go into, we look at hybrid work has become much more of a significant portion of work demand than it has been in the past. And so we took that pretty seriously this time, incorporating what the in-office time for different work sectors, employment sectors was, and took that into consideration. We assigned shares to 6 different building types. So at its most basic, imagine an office building and a land that an office building takes up compared to a warehouse, an Amazon warehouse, for instance, and how many employees are inside an Amazon warehouse and how much time that space that takes up. So at its most basic, but we have 6 different types. that we look at account for different office vacancies. Vacancy is a normal part of doing business. It's not unusual to have a small vacancy rate but we tend to have higher vacancy rates right now due to COVID and recovery. We are assuming a recovery of those to more stable, normal vacancy rates. We look, like I said, at the square foot per employee and the floor area ratios, which starts getting into an office building can sometimes have more than one story, whereas a warehousing for Amazon typically is one story. And ultimately that gets us to acres demanded. So basically with this slide, I just want you to understand that we go from numbers of employees needed by sector to understanding what the acres demanded by each of those types of buildings are. That's how we get to demand for employment. So let's see the results. Let's go to the next slide. Our results are going to be in terms of industrial and commercial. So two categories. Important to understand that medical institution, retail, and office space falls under commercial. So it's not just commercial that you might think of in terms of retail. And then industrial goes a bit broader to include flex and business park space as well. Next slide. Keep going, please. You'll see our draft results, and these are reflected in the urban growth report. We remember I said we present this information in the urban growth report as a range. So we have both baseline forecast and a low and a high. So that our policymakers and you can determine what you think is the most likely scenario. Baseline from our economists and professionals believe that's the most likely, but we never know how these things will go over a whole 20-year period. And so it's important to consider what might be a low or a high forecast. So if you look at those, then you can begin to see this is industrial land. No matter what forecast in terms of employment growth we see, we have the capacity, we do not have a deficit in industrial land, according to this analysis. So let's look again at, let's look at the next slide, which talks about commercial. Commercial is a little bit different in that you begin to see a deficit of land in the baseline growth forecast by just a little bit, 320 acres, and something higher in the high growth forecast at 1,820 acres. So commercial is a little bit different story in terms of the deficit that our analysis identified. Next slide. So we recognize that just because a land is identified as industrial and zoned for industrial doesn't mean that it is meeting the needs of our current industrial businesses. And so we decided to do an additional analysis to look at and understand what we are missing in the existing industrial land that we have developed. So we know that there's drawbacks of location. If they're not adequately located to serve certain types of business, then they won't be developed, as well as size. Most of that map that I showed you of available industrially zoned land is of small parcels. So if you go to the next slide, the governor's work, and so here, well, let me get to that next. But first, here's another map that shows just large lot development, and this is over 25 acres in 3 tiers, tier 3, tier 2, tier 1. Essentially, the basic way to understand these is that tier 3 is furthest from developability, least ready to accommodate businesses. Tier 1 is ready to accommodate businesses in the next, I believe it's 6 months. Tier 3 is years away. So you can see that there, number one, are not that many large sites in the region. And 2, very few of them are close to development ready. You can see that there's one green out here towards Forest Grove and another out in Gresham. But primarily we have some tier 2 in Hillsborough and a lot of tier 3 around the region. So next slide. So this is from the statewide semiconductor task force, talking about the type of site sizes that are really needed to accommodate particularly manufacturers of semiconductors. So that was focused on semiconductor, a facility that produces semiconductors is of 500 acres and larger. And you can see as this goes down. So the importance of these large sites cannot be overstated. Next slide. Is David here?
I am, yes.
Oh, good. Hi, David. Welcome.
Hi.
Do you mind jumping in, letting folks know who you are, and then specifically about the analysis we did in Sherwood to understand the specific need around large sites?
Happy to. So my name is David Tetrick. I use he, him pronouns. I am Metro's economic development planner. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today with Aaron and help present this work. So as Aaron said, the urban growth report is really about providing information to decision makers. And one way under state law that UGB can be expanded is if there is a forecasted need for employment land. You've seen our analysis that says under most scenarios that that's not necessary on the industrial side. But there's another opportunity under state law which allows for the expansion, which is if large lots or lots of particular sizes are needed in order to support critical industries. So we needed to be able to provide information to Metro Council and to you to really evaluate the question of whether that's necessary. As you saw from the Semiconductor Task Force, there is demand for larger sites, 50 acres and larger in the region. And based on that large lot inventory, we have very few opportunities that are within reach of our critical semiconductor industry and that are sufficiently large. So we wanted to make sure that we evaluated this question. We did an analysis with Echo Northwest on the Sherwood West mixed employment area, which is at the northern end of the proposed expansion, and found that it would help address the need for 50-acre and larger sites with relative proximity to existing high-tech semiconductor operations. That includes Hillsborough, but also includes businesses that have been locating in Sherwood already, Lamb Research and others that are really high-tech manufacturing and really critical to our semiconductor and our advanced manufacturing workforce in the region. These sites are also from multiple perspectives, relatively ready for development. There's some challenges in terms of getting utilities and infrastructure on site, but Sherwood has been planning ahead for that, working with partners like Clean Water Services and doing a very effective job on that. And these sites are relatively flat, which is really, really attractive as well. So we did this analysis just to provide the information to decision makers and to Metro Council about what need there may be for the large sites and whether Sherwood West could accommodate that need as well. Aaron, I can pass it back to you at this point.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, good. I was hoping, I forgot that this link is here, so we don't need to email it to you. There's our link. That's where you can find information about this process, but also that urban growth report. That's the most important. There's months now to review that information, to understand it, to ask your questions, and to begin to formulate your approaches to this decision-making, to participate in MPAC and our council hearings. All the technical appendices are available, so you can go really deep and stay up late several nights digging into this data and information and understanding it. You can encourage folks in your community to participate. We have a public comment survey available on that UGR, and then other ways to participate by submitting letters and participating in these upcoming public hearings, as I said. So the next really big step is for MPAC to receive an update on the urban growth report. That will be at their next meeting. And there's a break in August, and MPAC will have 2 meetings in September, as I showed you at the beginning, to receive that COO recommendation for Metro, discuss that, and then to make a recommendation at their second meeting on September 25th. So I'm glad that I could be here to give you guys an update on this, and I'm happy to stay and answer questions. You can go to the next slide, or we can go ahead and bring it down whenever you're ready.
All right. One thing I want to mention is, and I'm going to loop in Stephen and Council President Young. Mayor Beatty's asking, why are we looking and talking about this? One is because it's under land use. Two is Sherwood's looking for support of this because I'll let Council President Young and Stephen talk more about it. In my conversations with Mayor Rosner, the Metro Council, there's one or two councilors who are questioning the need for this employment zone because of those low baseline numbers, and that do we need these additional acres? So if I could have Stephen fill in some gaps here on the latest meetings that occurred at Metro, and then Council President Young, if you'd like to loop in too about what the current situation was with the Metro Council and your desire for getting support from the Washington County Coordinating Committee on this, employment law. I can't talk. Employment zone expansion. So, Stephen, you first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to emphasize, I think, just back to the bylaws for the WCCC. It includes reviewing and commenting and providing a forum for discussion for these sort of regional, both land use and transportation topics, and working when that's feasible to develop positions of countywide consensus to take to those regional discussions. So, and I think relative to Metro conversations, yes, I know MPAC recently received a briefing on the Sherwood West concept plan and the employment component of that specifically. And there are some questions, I think, around necessity and need. So I think it may be useful for your committee to just have a discussion around whether there's a sense that you want to provide a position relative to some of those questions.
Thanks. Council President Young?
Yeah, so I haven't sat in on those Metro meetings. That would have been staff and Mayor Rosner. But from what I've heard back, I'm in the middle of watching their last meeting, is that there may be one or two Metro councilors that might be concerned about whether there's a need or not a need for the employment lands. And I think, like was described with the UGR update, is while they might not show a need for these industrial lands, the size of industrial lands that we have available out there, I think could definitely, there is a need for, especially ours, being pretty much ready to go, and the size and the flatness, the slopes and all that. I also think from my perspective, as we talk about also transportation issues, in Sherwood, 9,000 residents leave Sherwood every day to go to work elsewhere, whether that's Beaverton, Portland, Hillsborough, Wilsonville, and we get jobs closer to home. I think in the end that also could help with transportation issues, where people would have a closer commute, and the type of jobs we want to attract or live, are living wage jobs, high tech park, things like that, not just big manufacturing warehouse type. So.
So I see three hands up, Mayor Beatty, then Mayor Calloway.
Okay, I'm going to try to frame my thoughts in a way here that doesn't sound like a gigantic critique. We've already discussed Sherwood's expansion, and the mayors have collectively agreed that we see great value in this. So the fact that we're discussing it again is just frustrating to me. We've already had this briefing this year, and there's so much work for us to do as a collective body. Continuing to talk about the same things is frustrating. But here's why I think the mayors agree. And I'll speak for myself, and I'm sure others will chime in. I'm looking at Metro's analysis, and what that does not take into account is how cities' budgets operate. Cities collect significantly less property tax revenue around multifamily housing. I know, I'm 51% renters with very low industrial and commercial land space here. To be able to make our budget work under 5 and 50, we need more industrial land. And so as we're cities are telling you what they need, and we continue to tell Metro what we need, and we continue to come back, and then Metro says, well, I don't know, that doesn't really seem like something we want to do. It's so frustrating. we as a body, as mayors, continue to tell Metro what cities need, and you guys continue to push back and not listen. This to me is such a no-brainer. The fact that we're all collectively, all these mayors are having the same conversation again, just annoys me to like high end. This is like, duh. If Sherwood is saying this is what they need, this is the best use of their land, our best job is to support them and listen. So you want a letter signed by mayors, I'm all in. I'll draft it.
Thank you, Mayor B. Well said. Mayor Callaway.
Thank you. I was just going to confirm also just the willingness to send a letter in from Washington County mayors. I had a question about, you know, the redevelopable land map. And, you know, it's curious to me, I guess, or well, it's evident to me that all of the redevelopable land in Washington County happens to be along corridors like, you know, TB Highway, Canyon, Hall, you know, those kinds of roads. But what stands out to me is that there is not a single tax lot of redevelopable land along 82nd in Portland, along Sandy, along Foster. How is it possible, having driven that area recently and seeing the same kind of empty strip malls that are identified as commercial redevelopable land in Washington County, how is it that there's not any to speak of redevelopable land in all of Portland and Multnomah County?
Maybe it's helpful to go back to the map. If someone's able to bring up the map, the one we're talking about is on slide 7 of the slide deck. One of the things, so there are redevelopable lands on 82nd and other areas of Portland. One of the things that I think is important to point out is how they're categorized. We do have different cities that zone their commercial areas differently. Some are identified as commercial zones, some are mixed use. So that plays into a little bit of the difference that you see. But there are you'll see a lot more industrial land if we're able to bring I'm looking at it on my screen, but we haven't gotten it shared with everybody yet. Here we go. So let's go, he wasn't talking about vacant, he was talking about redevelopment. So go go one more slide. Infill, there's redevelopable. So this is what I was saying in terms of 82nd. It's not without any, but your point is well taken. You see a lot more of the commercial popping up on the west side. And in part, that's because of the number of sites in Portland that are identified as mixed use. I hope that helps. It does. So, you know, but then this starts to compare apples and oranges, because without that explanation, we look at this and we say, oh, Washington County has all of the commercial and Multnomah County has all of the industrial. And so, you know, it boggles my mind then that information would be presented that would be purposefully misleading, not that on your part, but just misleading because we're comparing apples and oranges when it comes to land types. And then it makes me wonder, okay, what else is out there where we make assumptions based on little colors and little dots, finding out that they are totally, you know, disconnected and non-comparators and false equivalencies? Well, we did not put this information together to be deceptive. We put this together so that you could see redevelopable land. We create these maps for a particular purpose. So this one looks at redevelopable land. The other one's looked at infill and vacant land as a way of understanding how those three types come together to provide the full list. If we were wanting to do an analysis, which maybe you want to talk about doing in the future, that does that comparison across the region of redevelopable commercial land, we'd produce a new and different map to provide that kind of information. There are really helpful things that this map identifies, which is when you look along the Willamette River, for instance, and see that traditional industrial area has a lot more redevelopment in industrial. I estimate in terms of the age of those properties and why you see that. And so you just have different ages of development in different parts of the region, and that leads to some of these changes. But I apologize for it being confusing, but we were trying to provide information that lets you see redevelopment, infill, and vacant land and how those compare.
Thanks. And to be clear, Aaron, I'm not saying that it was meant to be deceptive. I would never say that. But I will agree that yeah, this can be confusing, you know, and even with like the Port of Portland has some land, but then that has to be, depending on where it is on port property, and where it's located, it has to be focused on marine. It has to be focused on aviation. And so it's not like you could even redevelop it for industrial uses. Generally, it has to be specifically targeted. And I'm guessing that a lot of that along the river are going to be similar things, because you're not going to put a you know, big research facility, for instance, where Greenbrier is, right there on the Willamette.
Yeah, we can bring the presentation down. Yeah, I will add, I think there's a real opportunity that this analysis has revealed, that there is a lot of industrially zoned land that is not developing into industrial. It is not becoming jobs and businesses. And why is that happening? Well, that's not what we set out to figure out with the urban growth boundary decision, but it's really important information for us as a region to talk about and to come up with some new analysis and some regional conversations about how we make sure that that land is developed into employment as quickly and effectively as possible.
And I think the same thing holds true within residential as well, because not to go down a different rabbit hole, but there's the assumption that all of the infill land, that the owners want to sell that, want to infill, and want to add to those, you know, to the rental housing market that Mayor Beatty alluded to before. I'll just close off with saying I'm ready to sign on to a letter if, you know, of support on behalf of Sherwood.
All right.
Can I say something while this map is up? I'm so sorry to bust
the
chair, but like, I just want to make sure that Metro, and particularly the Metro councilors, because I've had multiple conversations with them around Measure 5 and 50, and it was clear to me there is a gap of understanding on how cities collect property tax revenue. There is a gigantic money difference between industrial land and commercial land. And if that land is not going industrial, it is really robbing the west side of wealth that we are creating. And so I understand that's not part of your analysis here, but the revenue that industrial lands bring in. I mean, and if you look at Beaverton and a couple of the small blue dots, we would never zone that industrial in the middle of a community now, but we're going to hold on to it with a death grip because it is the most prized money that we can collect. And that's the wrong way for cities to think about this for the long run, but that's the cards we're dealt.
No, I totally agree with you. And I see more hands up. We're running out of time, but we'll get to them. The other question for me is the vast difference in wages in industrial land versus, you know, a retail mall. You know, if you have a commercial retail center, you know, those jobs are going to be, you know, a little bit above minimum wage. But when you have an industrial center, you've got, you know, traded skills, higher wages, and that's what we want to attract and build in the region versus more fast food restaurants and retail. But that's only my opinion. Going to Councilor Rosenthal has his hand up, and then Mayor Dehlin.
Thank you, Mayor Buvenik. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Mayor Beatty for her support for the Sherwood proposal. And I just want to say a couple things. One, first of all, we all understand that we have to go through this UGR process every so often. It's required by the state law. So staff has done a lot of work to try and expand the capacity or expand the understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. And I'll give them a credit for that. They've done a lot of work. Secondly, I think it's important to recognize that one of the reasons why I support this is because it's creating a potential industrial lands along the area where we've had the biggest growth. And that's whether it's a Cooper Mountain, the River Terrace 1, River Terrace 2, or Kingston Terrace. I think all these areas are lands that we're going to have people living in mixed kind of housing, some workforce housing, some higher. And this will provide at least some potential for jobs in that west side area, which I think both improves the property values as well as provides opportunity for people without having to commute across the entire area. So I think it's a well thought out proposal. And the other thing that really complicates things this year is, of course, as we understand that the population projections, because of some issues with Portland and the regional economy, we are not projecting the rapid growth rate from the region that would say that we absolutely have to keep adding UGB land where we have urban reserves. That question was somewhat in doubt because of the sort of the flatter projections this year. So it's been important to delve into this a little bit more deeply. Not all the members of the council support this Sherwood expansion, but I am one that does, and President Peterson also does. So I appreciate the support from the mayors of the Washington County Coordinating Commission.
Mayor Delane.
Hey, long as we got the map up, could you toggle back to where it actually shows a little bit of land in Cornelius?
Go backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not real. That's not right, but that's part of a larger problem. Because I was just Google, and Google even drags behind, apparently Google's in front of the Metro maps because most of that northern land in Cornelius has been developed or land banked. So it's no longer available. So just kind of a heads up, there's a giant building.
Thank you. Yeah, we took all of this vacant land capacity analysis to staff at each of the cities and asked for their confirmation of our locations for this developable land.
So I now that I've lodged my protest against the accuracy of the map, I wonder, Aaron, can you help me understand how you guys calculate time in it? Because you have this inventory of redevelopable land, but I've looked in my own community and I've looked across the different spots in the region, and the time scale can be horrendously long before the land ever becomes redeveloped, I'm seeing. So I'm wondering, what time scale are you guys using? Is it just, it could be forever, and if it's in forever, then we count it in the 20-year horizon?
Our horizon is 20 years. So we have to have and this is capacity. So do we believe that this capacity could be used in the next 20 years? The demand analysis asks you to say how much of that will actually occur, how much demand will be needed over the next 20 years to grow into these various types of spaces. And that's determined by an economic analysis of a forecast of job growth in different industries, and then translating that, as I showed on that all those steps on that slide, translating it into land need. So there's no question that when you estimate what might happen over 20 years, that you might get it wrong. And that's why we present it as a baseline and then a high and low when it comes to that growth for 20 years, because it is economists work on this and they have a really good track record of making good choices, but they're not going to see the ups and downs of the market that happen on a 5 or 10 year scale. Well, not even 5 year scale, so that's where the policymakers come in, where you and leadership and elected officials weigh in on those ranges to determine what you think is most likely.
So while I got the floor one more minute here, I'll say I'm in support of the Sherwood. I wish Cornelius could have brought in 500 acres on the north side, because we have the same problem that everybody's talking about. 6,000 people. We only have 14,000, but 6,000 of them leave town every day to go somewhere else for employment, with an average commute of 29 minutes. So that means they're going a lot further than Hillsborough for most of the jobs. So I'm full support of Sherwood. Good for you guys. Maybe someday we can get our 500 acres north of town, because it's the stuff we've got now is developed. So thank you. Thanks for the analysis.
Okay, and the last comment here, then it sounds like the question of whether we were going to support the letter is already done. It sounds like we all support a letter. I saw Commissioner Fye had her hand up and it went down. Commissioner Fye, wanted to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I was gonna express support for Sherwood as well, and also as well Metro's analysis, because it illustrates the lack of development-ready large industrial sites that we have around the region, and also just to plug in place matters in urban growth boundary expansion request. I mean, Sherwood has demonstrated development readiness and that they are part of an area with growing industrial development. So I'm in support, and if we go forward with a letter route, we'll be supportive of that as well from the board.
Great. Thank you. So can we go ahead and take the map down? And I think it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to direct staff to draft a letter to the Metro Council in support of Sherwood's employment lands ask. So I'll go ahead and just ask for a show of hands of those folks who are in favor of staff drafting a letter for us to sign and send to Metro. All right. See anyone's hands?
I'll say aye for it. Since
right.
I'm off camera for now.
Right. And I think some of Mayor Beatty's points should be placed in that letter. They were terrific points. You got what you need, Stephen, on that one?
We do. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Aaron, and for your presentation on that. We're now going to move on because we're a little bit behind for a presentation from Trevor Sleeman from ODOT. Some of you might have seen this. This is ODOT's presentation of what they're looking forward at in the binoculars for the 2025 session, their needs and questions on how to fund those needs going further to fund all the programs that they need to get accomplished, that we want to have accomplished, and work with the legislature in 2025. With that, I believe we have Trevor. So
yep, I'm here. Thank you for the introduction. That covers a lot of what I was going to say on this first slide here. Right. So appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thanks for having me here today. My name is Trevor Sleeman. I am the Strategic Initiatives Advisor at ODOT Region 1 in Portland. I've been on the job for about 2 months, so I will run through the presentation, but may not be the best suited person to address any questions, but we'll see. The mayor is absolutely correct. You may have seen this presentation already in other forums, and so you may have the urge to multitask your way through the next 20 minutes, and that's fine. But before you go digging into your inbox, I would just leave you with one thought, and that is to just take note of the fact that you have seen this in multiple forums before. We are trying really hard to be disciplined and clear and consistent about the structural revenue challenges we're facing at ODOT and how serious and significant that problem is. We want to be sure we are saying the same things about it to everyone and everyone we possibly can, in the hopes that leads into a very productive conversation in the legislative session early next year. So for those of you this is new for, let's dig into it a little bit. This presentation is pretty specific to ODOT. But we definitely recognize these structural challenges aren't unique to ODOT or the state. They don't just impact us. These are shared by you all at the local government level. And frankly, other states and the feds are dealing with the same stuff too. Just we're all dealing with challenges and impact. And the issue is just, it's not going to go away on its own and deserves focused and intentional conversation. So that's why I'm here today, and my colleagues have been at JPACT and elsewhere with this message. So anyway, this is just some context setting. I think most of us are familiar with ODOT, but we do have a pretty broad book of business. We work in every community across the state. Next time you drive through Brothers or Basque Station, you'll see an ODOT maintenance yard there. We have over 8,000 miles of highway and 2,500 bridges statewide, and close to 5,000 employees truly working in every community across the state. So our priority and our focus is absolutely to deliver on core critical services that the public has come to expect, rightfully so, from this agency. And so, safe system, whether that's through education, enforcement, construction programs, We're not just a highway department. We work very hard to develop and maintain a connected multimodal network. And like I mentioned, we have some real basic things that we expect of ourselves and the public expects us to deliver, whether that's keeping highways open and keeping folks moving, having, being able to expect reasonable service at the DMV, those kinds of things. And our ability to meet those expectations is really hampered by some of the structural revenue challenges that we face. So got a couple of different portions of this presentation. I'll try and run through quickly to keep you all on time. We'll talk a little bit about some of the structural drivers and then some of the impacts potentially and what some of the solutions could be. So next slide, please. I touched on this a little bit, but again, there are lots of things that we do at this agency that the public has come to expect us to just do, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. We need to be out there plowing snow. We need to be patching potholes and cleaning up trash. And those sort of, essential functions are things that we want to do, and we want to make sure that folks can just plain and simple rely on the transportation system and its basic safe operations on a daily basis. But we want folks to be able to, continue to plan for and be able to get from point A to point B safely and efficiently. And so, where we're really focusing on this conversation on is kind of on these 3 points, just in terms of, we've got some basic service functions that we feel are essential that we have to deliver. There are some things that we have to do on the transportation system, some investments we have to make just to keep its safe operations up. And there were some commitments made to large projects in the previous transportation funding bill that we're also trying to sort out as well. So that's kind of the focus areas for us as we lead into this conversation in 2025. Next slide, please. You can skip this one too. So this slide has been around for several years in lots of different presentations, and you may have seen it before, and that's because this problem has been around for several years and has gotten no less acute here recently as we've dealt with all sorts of new and fun challenges the last few years with inflation and those sorts of things. So it's helpful to think of ODOT's budget in terms of kind of two different sides of things. So on the left there, we've got what's essentially our capital budget. This is, major projects, new interchanges, major paving projects. Think construction projects that we're contracting out for, things that are in the STIP if you're a transportation person in our capital improvement program. Generally things we're paying contractors to build on behalf of the citizens of Oregon. That side of the budget gets a lot of dedicated and directed funding, whether that's our federal formula dollars from the infrastructure bill that passed a couple of years ago, whether that's directed money from House Bill 2017 that the legislature by statute put into construction. Think about these as projects in the STIP, and a lot of that money, the vast majority of it, it's not flexible. It has to go into construction. So the federal formula dollars, for example, we can't actually use on maintenance. We can't pay our own folks to maintain our system with federal dollars. There's a specific prohibition against that. So I wouldn't necessarily ever say that the capital side of the budget is well funded. There's always a need, but certainly relative to the maintenance and agency operations side of the budget that you see on the right there, it's in better shape because of all of that directed funding that's set aside specifically for construction. And so on the maintenance and operations side, we really rely on funding from the state highway fund to do that basic road maintenance work that we can't do with federal dollars. We also use money from the state highway fund to keep our 59 DMV field offices open and operating around the state. We have some regulatory offices for heavy trucks that need to be open to provide customer service. And then, of course, we have, like any other organization that has 5,000 employees, we have some expenses for basic things like HR and IT and contracting and procurement. And all of those sort of basic interior functions also have to be funded out of the state highway fund, which is, as I've said, revenue-wise in a little bit of a rough shape. Next slide, and I can talk a little bit about that. So this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but this is how the State Highway Fund has been funded for decades. Pretty simple and elegant, I guess. It's kind of a weird word to describe a revenue system, but it's really, we talk about it a lot as a three-legged stool. You've got gas tax coming in that we all pay at the pump. Heavy trucks pay a weight mile tax to our Commerce and Compliance Division. And then anytime you're at the DMV, those fees that you pay, whether it's, license, title, or reg fee, those kinds of things, that goes into the State Highway Fund as well. So it's for the longest time served us well, relatively diversified, but it's just not keeping up in the modern environment when we've got, drivers like inflation taking a bite out of our purchasing power every year. We've got the statutorily dedicated funding that I talked about. And I think a lot of folks are familiar with the issues with the gas tax and its decline. We've got more efficient vehicles, hybrids, EVs are all contributing less to the State Highway Fund and gas tax than they used to. And certainly that's a good thing for climate goals. I don't want to leave you all with the impression that that's a negative thing by any means. And those are laudable goals and ought to be supported. But it does come with some downsides for our system, our current system of revenue collection. So the result takeaway here is that the system is just not sustainable over time any longer. So next slide, please. So the next, I get probably 2 to 3 slides here to deal with this question we get a lot, which is particularly last fall when we were talking about winter maintenance cuts. It's ODOT, you've got $6 billion in revenues over the next 2 years. Are you telling me you really can't find some money in there to fix these issues on your own? What do you mean you can't plow or pick up litter? You've got $6 billion. Well, yeah, it is a big budget. I'll grant you that, as you can see in this snapshot here. But you can also see that a lot of this money is dedicated. The vast majority of the funding in our budget is going to capital improvements. That's, again, the mix of state and federal money that is dedicated to construction and is going out through the STIP. We do get some funding from the feds and elsewhere for non-road modes. We operate a passenger rail service jointly with Washington State and Amtrak, for example. So there's revenue coming in for other specific purposes. And so really those 2 darker yellow slices on the left side of this chart show what's available to us to do those kind of 2 functions that I talked about earlier, the maintenance and operations, which is the orange trucks you see out there plowing and patching and doing that good stuff. And then the agency operations, which is kind of that more internal staff and support functions. So, the stuff that's keeping the doors open. So next slide, we can talk a little bit more about this with some context at the state level. So we had the federal infrastructure package a couple of years ago, and before that we had House Bill 2017, which was a sort of a record-setting state level investment in the transportation system. Sorry, hang on, I'm on the wrong note here. So this slide gives you, I guess, what are we now, 6-7 years after passage? This gives you a snapshot of 1 year of all the revenue that's coming into ODOT from that bill. So this is over and above what we were collecting prior to 2017. And again, you can see, you start chunking things out here, and there's not a whole lot left over for ODOT agency operations. I think the real success story in this chart is that transit slice of the pie, which is, about a quarter of it. Prior to this bill, we really didn't have a statewide funding mechanism to support transit at all. And so we went from kind of 0 to, I don't even know, $100 million plus a year that's going into transit, and that's connecting communities all over the state and new vehicles and you name it. It's really been a game changer. It is, however, this is a familiar story, fully dedicated to transit and not something that we could use on maintenance and agency operations even if we wanted to. So you got to peel that out of the money that came in through House Bill 2017. We've got the rough 50-30-20 allocations peeled out for cities and counties. The 29% there is legislatively directed to to construction. And the end result here is that we've got a balance of less than 2% of that new money that could actually be spent on highway maintenance and agency operations. So House Bill 2017 undoubtedly did a lot of good. It helped diversify revenue streams, but it just didn't provide that additional funding for ODOT agency operations for us to continue to deliver maintenance and services at the level that, frankly, they were being delivered at the time, let alone what the need would be into the future. Next slide. So this is just, again, to kind of keep hammering this point, you can see this is just state highway fund resources, I should say. There's no federal money here. But you can see that three-legged stool there on the left, the DMV fees, the heavy truck taxes, and fuels taxes. And you can, see how we have to start peeling off different obligations that we've incurred over the years. OTA 1 and 2, if you were around then, was a big package of bridge investments that helped bring the standards and conditions of our bridges up. Very important investment. Definitely a good use of taxpayer dollars to bond for that, but it does come with a downstream cost. So we're paying debt service on that. You can see the 50-30-20 is peeled out there, and down here on the bottom is the share that's left over for ODOT. And again, more coming out of that for debt service and dedicated capital programs. So it's just another way to kind of visualize what I've been saying here. Next slide. And this is probably review for a lot of folks, but just some of the reasons that we're dealing with this. I touched on fuels tax declines. I saw we've got a video, and I can share a link around later that talks about this problem in a really, I think, a good, clear and succinct way that's accessible for the public. And one of the features that's in there, or one of the facts that's in there, notes that a new Toyota Camry, if you go and buy a new Toyota Camry hybrid today, it's rated at 52 miles per gallon. And a new Toyota Camry in the year 2000 was rated by the EPA for 19 miles per gallon. So, I think a lot of this challenges with the gas tax gets blamed on EVs, and certainly it's a contributing factor, but I think just improvements across the entire fleet are really driving a decline in gas tax. We've got the three-legged stool. I said that earlier that it was worked for a lot of years, but I think it's just not as evolved as our current system requires. It does not account for the record rise in inflation. None of our fuel taxes or fees are indexed in any way. So it's just, inflation continues to eat our lunch. Next slide. It actually looks like Mayor Callaway might have a question.
Sorry, I'm more than happy to wait till the end, Trevor.
Oh, okay, sure.
You've got a couple questions waiting once you're done.
Okay. So this slide, this talks about, I think helps to visualize a little bit those priorities I talked about earlier. These are our priorities going into the 2025 session, and you can see, there's different categories, but you can see kind of the gap, right, where we're short. So we've got customer service, we've got agency operations, the maintenance stuff that I've talked a lot about, and you can see where and how much we're short on each of those. And that next, the safety system category, you can see, we need to do some maintenance paving to keep the system in good shape and to allow folks to make their way around safely on the roadway. Safe Routes to Schools is a hugely oversubscribed program, with folks around the state wanting a piece of that pie. And that third category, those two projects on the bottom, the fulfilling House Bill 2017 commitments, that one's a little bit scrambled, since we were, I think, anticipating tolling helping to pay for those two large projects in some capacity. And with that on an indefinite pause, those numbers are a little bit different, and that part of the conversation is a little bit different. But again, this is meant to just sort of generally illustrate the need. And I think it's also instructive, having lived through a couple of different transportation packages. I think it's interesting to note what's not here. There is not a list of projects here. We are of capital projects where I think really trying to scrupulously avoid that, because that is not the issue that we are hoping the legislature will address. And so that is a little bit of a different take leading into the next legislative session. So that's, I think, one noteworthy thing about this slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is, yeah, that slide's fine there. I think oh, sorry, go back one. There you go, future needs. I think that the takeaway here is just about the impact, right? The cuts that are going to have to come if nothing is done about this. We did some messaging around this last fall, you may have noticed, where we talked about we didn't have enough snowplow drivers or equipment to stay on top of snowy routes like we did in the past. Those were real and significant cuts, and I think that generated a good deal of consternation across the state. And thankfully, the legislature in this short session came in and provided us with some stopgap funding to sort of stave off those cuts. But they're very real and not going away. And I think we're really, again, trying to be really consistent to illustrate to the legislature that there will absolutely be impacts if this isn't addressed. So that's, I think that's sort of the general gist of this one. And I think, we're just really hoping to provide some context for the need to act and what happens if we don't. Next slide. This is the honeycomb chart. And so you can see the old three-legged stool there on the left. And these are some options that we could potentially, share with the legislature that they could potentially take up to modernize the state highway fund. Lots of things on here. I don't know that any one of these is a single magic solution. And certainly, in their infinite wisdom, the legislature will hopefully pick a good mix that will put the state highway fund on a more stable path for the future. Indexing to inflation, whether that's CPI or the FHWA's construction cost index, that is absolutely something that I think would help over the long term. The gas tax, though it's declining, there's still plenty of people who drive internal combustion engine vehicles, and some revenue could be raised there. Our 2 cents per mile road usage charge program could be expanded. I saw the other day the state of Colorado has started assessing a 27-cent fee on package deliveries, essentially an Amazon fee. Who knows what the legislative appetite for something like that in Oregon is, but I think the point is that there are no shortage of ideas. There are other states and other governments that are out there dealing with this problem in interesting ways. And I think, in all of the above approach is probably what's best for the future, just to get things stabilized and on better footing for the long term. So I think that's where I'll end. And I know we didn't touch a whole lot on local government needs, and certainly these problems are as acute for local governments as they are for us. And I expect that local governments, and in fact, I know I was just on a call earlier with JPAC staff, local governments and associations are putting together their lists of needs leading into the legislative conversations as well. And I think we look forward to that input too. So I will end there. Thanks for your time. And like I said, I'll do my best with questions, but probably I'll have to get back to you.
All right. So Councilor Rosenthal and then Mayor Callaway. Maybe Councilor Rosenthal stepped away. So Mayor Callaway, you're up first.
All right, thanks. Great information. When it comes to the funding structural challenges, I would love to see you include the fact that we are sending billions of dollars back in the kicker, because at a time when the Treasury is receiving far more money than they budgeted for, that is the time when other states are investing in their transportation system, whether it's infrastructure or people. And so we can say it's the decline of fuel and other things. But the reality is, when the times are good, we send that money back. So I know that's more editorial and opinion, but but it is factual that if we weren't sending money back with the kicker, that we would have money for transportation needs, and we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So, I think it could be included without sounding too overtly political and advocacy. Thank you.
Right. Mayor Delane.
Thanks.
Just trying to figure which of the three mutes I had still muted. Trevor, thanks for bringing this up. I think one of the first things we need to do is make sure that we don't have an us and them discussion when it comes to looking at the revenue, right? You talked about cities and counties. We need to come to the table together, right? The cities, the counties, the state, we all need to come to the table with a collaborative recommendation that's good for the all of Oregon, right? And that way we don't get pit against each other, for one, and for two, we all come out with something hopefully we can work with, because we have a 2-cent local option gas tax. It's very important to us. We don't want that to get lost as the new whatever the cool thing is gets figured out. So I think that's very critical that we don't disrupt some of those existing ones that are working. But to your point also, I think I've talked to our local representative who's the co-chair on the transportation. I think looking at the income tax system is a great one, and Mayor Callaway spoke about it, right? It's one of the most efficient systems for gathering tax dollars, and it's also one of them we give away. So I think none of us want to have to sit on the committee where we tell somebody a critical service doesn't get funded because we've overgrown the budget and we got a down year. But to figure out a way that we use those up years where the economy grows beyond the expectations for the professionals, that we have ways and plans to spend that money on these critical things like infrastructure, like we talk about housing support. All of those are critical. So I think we need to make sure we're at the table and we're discussing how we get the appropriate bite for transportation. And then also when you talk about affordability and who can pay it, I think our local representatives' discussion about using the income tax system also allows us to look at adding some kind of mileage thing like you talked about, where we're right now at the 2 cents, it's optional. How do we make it mandatory for electric vehicles? How do we make it mandatory for hybrids? And then also, how do we not hurt those who can least afford it? We have a lot of working poor in our communities all around the region that would really hurt. So if we base it on the income system, then they can actually go in and go, oh, you made this low a level, we're not going to hit you with any kind of road usage tax. But those who have and can't afford would then contribute at the income tax system, right? Would be your checks and balances on the vehicles. So I think we all have to go together, and we need to look at what's best for all of Oregon, because there's this strip of us in the valley that think and do things a certain way, and then there's a lot of the rest of Oregon that has to look at it a different way. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. That's a great encapsulation of lots of different parts of this discussion. So appreciate it.
It looks like Councilor Rosenthal will be the last comment on this subject because we need to move on. He just disappeared. So I guess he doesn't. Well, thanks, Trevor, for joining us today and giving the presentation. As Mayor Delane said, we look forward to working, in conjunction, state, city, county to figure out how we can build a system of revenue that ODOT can continue its services, that the cities and counties get their shares of the gas tax, and that ideally we can avoid tolling. We just have to figure out how we can do that from other fees.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right. That brings us to item C, which is the 2025 legislative priorities. Stephen, Jessica, and Carly Silva Gabrielson, our new Washington County staffer who is handling state legislation and policy. She's the government relations manager. She reports to Aaron Doyle. Will lead us in a discussion of what we might want to segue in from Trevor's discussion, what our priorities are for the transportation package that everyone's talking about in the 25 session. Stephen.
Great. I'm actually going to turn to Carly and let her introduce herself. She let us know she's going to have to jump off the call, but she wants to introduce herself, kick us off, and then Jessica and I will step in and take over.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Hi, Chair Bubenik, Commissioner Fye, mayors. My name is Carly Silva Gabrielson. Apologize as a loud truck goes out outside my window, but my name is Carly Silva Gabrielson. I am a member of the government relations team with Washington County and have the honor of having transportation within my portfolio. So I am going to be tasked with leading the charge on behalf of Washington County to ensure that our regional priorities are well represented. I'm really happy to be here before you today. It's a really exciting time as we're considering a lot of things, both here locally and also at the regional level and state level. And as Stephen mentioned, I unfortunately do have a 1:30 commitment to work group, so I'm going to jump off fairly quickly, but I think I can go to the next slide. Thank you, Teresa. Wonderful. So I just wanted to touch on what we're aiming to cover here today. And we're looking forward to this being a conversation and really hearing from you. But we're going to touch on the 2025 state transportation package priorities, really just broadly. Also what's happening at JPAC and provide a quick update there. We also really want to talk about the Joint Transportation Committee and the fact that we are honored with having the final stop on the roadshow, which is going to be September 27th. And as I mentioned, we really want to hear from you about your ideas and priorities and local needs, and then just talk about next steps as a collective. I'd love to go to the next slide. Thank you, Teresa. So with the 2025 state transportation package and priorities, we wanted to just talk about some general themes and framing, which is up there. I'm gonna just not touch on everything, but I do want to provide some framing that frankly, legislative leadership and the governor have publicly committed to a transportation package in 2025. But to be clear, that doesn't mean that it will definitely happen. What it does indicate is that key leadership is on board with it being a focus for the session and are absolutely committed to attempting to see it across the finish line. But that's really going to require a lot of political support and compelling testimony and encouragement from local partners such as yourself. Additionally, I wanted to flag that there have been some changes in the tolling program, as we all know. The regional mobility pricing program is not moving forward, and the 205 Abernathy tolling is currently paused. We'll see if those two projects do come back around. But again, just really quickly touching on the themes and framing. It's very, very important to, I think, everyone here in the state and obviously ODOT that we ensure sustainability for safety, operations, and maintenance. That is just crucial for everyone in Oregon, whether you're here in the Tri-County region or a rural partner in another area of the state. Something absolutely that we need to do is complete the unfulfilled projects and promises from House Bill 2017, which again, we're all very well aware of. We also really need to have a focus on collective funding for programs like Great Streets versus specific projects. All regions definitely have a lot of significant projects that are really compelling to focus on, but we are really concerned that focusing too much on a single project risks creating division. Further focusing on funding one or two big arterials in our community or collectively advocating for future funding capacity to work on many arterials throughout the region is really what you should be thinking about, or what we recommend you think about. Again, just talking about long-term funding plans versus short-term project funding. Of course, really important is maintaining that 50, 30, 20 funding for localities and the county so we can do our important work. And lastly, on this slide, 2020, as I mentioned, a 2025 transportation package is not guaranteed, and we will need to build the legislative support and convince our legislators that our region is on the same page, that we are going to work together, and that taking on this very politically complex work is worth their time and the possible political capital. So I look forward to engaging with all of you and again, working as a collective to ensure that our region is very well represented. And at that, I'm going to pause and pass the baton to my colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carly. I appreciate you kicking us off. So I did want to just maybe reinforce a couple of themes. I think Trevor's presentation about ODOT was really a good setup for this conversation. We had a couple of comments. I think Mayor Delane just really wanting to ensure that the locals and ODOT are both kind of moving along through this process together. There's also this regional effort that we'll touch on a bit in this presentation today. And of course, the county board, and I'm sure many of your councils are also looking at their own legislative priorities. And so we're looking for where there are opportunities for synergy. And I think I would just reinforce Carly's comment about really thinking about what are the things that we can coalesce around and really support, as opposed to maybe diving too far into specific advocating for specific projects, but really thinking about what are the kinds of funding, what are the kinds of programs that will help achieve some of the objectives, some of which may be specific projects, but thinking about how the programs and the funding streams are set up to help us achieve those outcomes. And so with that, I'm going to turn to Jessica, who's going to keep walking through, and I may just jump in periodically to either add or emphasize a point.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stephen. It looks like Mayor Beatty has a question. Do you want to ask that now?
I don't know how you want this to be iterative. Do you want us to wait till you're completely done?
It's up to you. We're going to go through what's going on at JPAC and then the JCT tour, and then some questions for WCCC, but feel free to jump in now.
I think like my concern around focusing on fundings like Great Streets is this would be the fourth session where they've tried to do that and it's unsuccessful. The Metropolitan Mayors Consortium met with the chairs of the Transportation Committee, and we had been advocating for them to do more of a package like we just saw around water. No, like we keep saying water is a big deal. They keep trying to go out and get money. It always fails. But when they came back and said 50 projects, we're doing 50 projects, they got it over the line. So the mayors are much more inclined. Well, the other mayors could speak up, but this is from Metropolitan Mayors. We want them to do more project-based stuff because when we just say fund something and they never do it, there's not the political will. And so my concern about being so broad is that when you're so broad, it means nothing.
I think that's a really great comment. And it looks like Mayor Callaway has a response. And I think just to touch on that a minute, part of what we were, I think, reacting to in general is we keep hearing from, like we just had Representative McLean that was at the Washington County Chamber, and they keep talking about the back to basics. But I appreciate this approach that maybe we should be thinking about projects. And I guess the other thing is, which projects would those be? There's not that HB 2017 style projects that anyone is talking about yet, I guess, that has regional consensus. But we can. I mean,
but none of us were going into the session thinking about 50 water projects either. I mean, we could just take them. There are ways for us to take an in-step list or something like that. Like the finding projects, which should not be the concern here. There are plenty of them to advocate for. But if we go in and say, fund everything like Great Streets, do you think someone like Tualatin is going to get money for that? No, it's going to go through some state DEI lens where they value it, and Washington County is going to be completely cut out of it. So my fear, if we do that, we're going to be, Washington County will not have a prominent place in this discussion, and we're viewed as newer and less needy if we do something like that versus saying, here are 6 projects that drive growth or however we want to connect to it. That is the way that I think we should be lobbying the state versus general things like this. That's just my opinion.
Mayor Keller?
I'll jump in and just say preserving that 50-30-20 split is critical. You know, the cities cannot continue to be seen as an ATM for the state or for the county with their, you know, with budget cuts that are rolling, you know, downhill to affect us. So when ODOT has less money, when the county has less money for transportation, then all of that lands on our shoulders. And so then what meager resources we have to deal with this, those resources can't be cut by eliminating or tinkering, you know, with that 50-30-20 split. Thank you.
Totally agree. Mayor Lou?
Hi. Yeah, no, I just want to agree with Mayor Beatty where I think sort of like collective funding programs, general support, yes, but if we want success comes from specific asks, not general ideas. And so if there's an opportunity to advocate for some of these programs, yes, but I think if we really want to truly ask for something and push for something, it has to include a specific ask and specific projects. That's my recommendation too.
All right, noting this all down. Why don't we go to the next slide and we'll just continue through, and then we have a few questions for you, and maybe that will also help inform how we approach this over the next 6 months. So obviously this policy development has been underway at JPAC over the past few months. At each JPAC meeting, they've had different speakers talking about different aspects of transportation funding. Again, the areas of emphasis have been long-term sustainable funding, as we're talking about 50-30-20, making sure everyone gets their share of future revenue sources, the safe arterials, funding for gray streets, and transit and resiliency. So funding for transit, and then resiliency meaning like bridges, airports, that sort of thing. So the timeline that they're working on, I think the next couple meetings, August is canceled, but July and September are, and October are going to be continued discussion on the draft legislative priorities. And so these were developed by staff, including me and Carly and Aaron Doyle, and then other staff supporting JPAC members. We have been meeting on a regular basis and anticipate continued meeting through the legislative session, just to try and stay together as a region, a collective voice and opinion as we go through this process. Next slide, please. So this slide shows basically a summary of what's in the JPAC packet regarding the draft legislative priorities, and that is short-term funding solutions to stabilize operations and maintenance, long-term sustainable funding to provide that stability and ensure local agencies continue to receive a proportional share of applicable revenues. And this is important, of course, because we receive that share of gas tax, but if there's any new revenue sources, like Trevor was sort of illustrating, maybe there will be a few more honeycombs filled in the funding matrix that we can also have a proportional share of those, similar to how we fund gas tax or how we get gas tax revenue. Finish what we started by completing those HB 2017 projects, increase investments in safe urban arterials and main streets, increase state funding for transit capital and operations, and increase resilience of our critical infrastructure like airports and bridges. And of course, that's supporting things like IBR getting done and fully funded. Next slide, please. The other big thing that's happening, of course, is the Joint Transportation Committee, the legislative committee, doing this tour where they are going around and taking an actual physical tour of a location or locations in each stop, and then having an invited roundtable discussion, and then having time for public testimony. So we will be the last stop in Hillsborough on Friday, September 27th. They have outlined 4 goals for these meetings in general. 1, build public understanding of transportation funding challenges and potential funding tools to address those challenges. They've also said at each tour stop that they want to know what's important to us at those stops. What are the needs and desires, and just what they need to know about what we're dealing with. They're intended to build legislative understanding of statewide transportation needs and shared priorities. Figure out what should be included in the package in 2025, and gather input from the public and community leaders about preferred methods for addressing transportation funding challenges. And I think they're taking ideas on alternative funding revenues. I know when I went to the Washington County Chamber Committee, the Transportation Committee event where Representative McLean was there, she was talking about the idea of maybe even a convenience fee that they're studying. It sounds like 8 states are doing a convenience fee where they charge something like 25 cents to 50 cents on a $100 order, on every order that is paid by the business. This exempts things like, I think, food and certain types of deliveries, maybe medical or things like that, but like an Amazon, a FedEx, a UPS, those would be charged. So that's something I think they're looking at as what an example of other states are doing that they might be able to research and replicate. Next slide, please. So a couple questions that we have for you here. What key issues? So maybe we'll go through this slide and then we have another slide about WCCC member ideas of what you guys want to talk about in this space over the next few months, if you do. So the first set of questions we have, what key issues do you want to see addressed at the Joint Transportation Committee stop in Hillsborough on September 27th? I understand some of you are probably attending some of the other tour stops, and so it would be interesting to hear your perceptions of how those are going. Number two, who do you think we should propose for the invited roundtable portion of the tour? And also note there will be a public testimony portion of the event for individual testimony for those not attending the actual roundtable. Next slide, please. And then we wanted to talk just about, oh, back one, there we go. WCCC specifically, what our conversation should be. What are your priorities for the 2025 state transportation package? We're already getting ideas thrown out there. It's great. And do you want to have time to discuss 2025 legislative priorities on WCCC agendas leading up to the 2025 session? And then if you do, what items would you like more information about or to discuss in more detail? And would you like us to invite any guest speakers to talk specifically about those things? Okay, next slide. I think this is our last one, which is our next steps. As we continue to go through this process, we will begin organizing for the Joint Transportation Committee stop. We're kind of lucky that we're at the end so we can learn from the other stops. We don't have a lot of information available yet about this, including how many spots on the roundtable there are, what the actual tour stops will be. So I know that Aaron and Carly will be working closely with ODOT's office to nail those things down. But we wanted to just start the conversation about what we want to talk about, identify who those roundtable participants can be or should be, and then identify key topics and individuals to provide public testimony. Our government relations team is also talking about developing a web form where we can send out via our listserv to members and alternates to collect ideas, areas of interest, areas of engagement, anything else that we should know. And this is especially important because we don't have a WCCC meeting in August. So this will be a good way for us to get your additional input. And of course, you can always email us. I'm going to stop there and open it up to discussion on the questions that we posed.
So which one do you want us to attack first, Jessica? And then we're going to talk about a possible meeting date for the in-person date to discuss this too for the coordinating committee in September.
Yes, we were originally thinking about September, just as the legislative priorities and transportation funding in general. Maybe Stephen can jump in on that. We might need to postpone it a bit.
Yeah, I think we're having some internal conversations about potentially other topics that we could try to gather together for an in-person retreat with the WCCC. So our dates are maybe a little bit up in the air, but given that we have, I think, until December really to try to finalize if the committee wants to put forward a kind of legislative priority, I think we have time for that conversation.
All right. I see Councilor Rosenthal's hand up.
Oh, you're muted, Councilor Rosenthal.
It didn't automatically unmute. Just a question, maybe it's too rhetorical, but it strikes me that since the Tri-County area is 50% of the population, over 50% of the road network, well, not the road network, but the road usage, average vehicle usage is 100,000 per day, and most of the freight traffic. Does it seem entirely appropriate that we only have 3 of those hearings in the metro region, which is less about 20% of the hearings? Do you think that I guess my question is, for example, the area that caused the biggest controversy, which is say, southern Clackamas and southern Washington counties over the tolling, that is not particularly represented, and maybe Portland is not adequately represented. So I'm just wondering if there is if there's any thought that this is perhaps more hearings should be held in the metropolitan region, and if so, what we can do about it.
You mean specifically for the JCT tour, the Joint Transportation Committee tour?
Yes.
I mean, I think we could certainly provide our feedback to ODOT, or ODOT is managing the tour, so that's our first point of contact.
But my question is really to the mayors and the representatives of the cities, is whether they feel adequately represented. I mean, my personal feeling is I don't, but I'm just one person and I'm representing sort of a sort of a metro perspective, but so that's a question to the group, really.
Because we're running short of time, I'll let people think about that and let Mayor Beatty speak, and then we can come back to your question.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think they should do more meetings. My question is, my statement is, I don't think we have any impact in that and how they're doing it. And so I don't know at this juncture if it's worth it. I would say I would like to be invited to the roundtable as the mayor of the second largest city in Washington County. I also have the unique detriment of 2 abandoned state highways, a federal rail line, and a MAX line, all in our downtown core. So if you're adding and talking about tours or stopping places, Beaverton is a great place where all of those things we're trying to address can be, particularly around the loop that has a federal component to it. So I would say that. I think Tigard, Highway 99 is a great place that we should be looking at. I think obviously all of the totality of BH Highway that goes from Beaverton all the way out to Forest Grove is an important aspect. And so it's what do we want to highlight? And I think the majority of our problems come around state roads and their lack of funding and underfunding them. And that has been our collectively largest voice in Salem among Hillsborough, Tigard, and Beaverton in particular, is abandoned state highways. I don't call them orphans. That doesn't seem right to me. They weren't like magically gone. They were abandoned. So I've adopted that term. So feel free.
All right. Other suggestions? Or do you want, because we're about 15 minutes away, we've got a couple more things. Can folks email you, Jessica and Stephen, ideas for those questions? Since we've got the PowerPoint in our package, mayors and staff can huddle and send you some ideas.
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
and we are intending to get that web form out to you all as well. That'll give a form to provide some feedback as well.
Yeah, and I guess one question that if we can just do a thumbs up or not is, do we want to have time to discuss this on WCCC agendas leading up to the session?
I'd say yes. I mean, this is all critical, all of us, with the whole region. Thumbs ups.
Okay, so then I guess to follow up, feel free to email us suggestions then of what you would want to talk about in more detail so we can be prepared for those agendas. And if we need to bring in some guest speakers to go over funding sources or anything like that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and just a reminder, WCCC is taking a month off in August, so we'll pick back up in September.
All right. That brings us to item D, the JPAC agenda. This is Mayor Callaway and Commissioner Fye giving us an update on what they're going to be discussing here at their next meeting of JPAC.
Commissioner Fye, do you want to have the first go at it?
Mayor Callaway, go ahead. I have my camera off, and
okay,
but I'm here.
All right,
I'll chime in as needed.
So on the consent agenda, there are 7 projects that we'll be looking at for project delivery requirements. Basically, it's just approving that. We have a couple. We're adding 2 projects and canceling 1 existing project as an action item. And so basically we're doing that to meet the federal transportation project delivery requirements. And that's the amendment is basically looking at the Rose Quarter Improvement Project. We're spending an hour talking about regional transportation priorities and funding. And so trust me, everything that we've talked about here will be presented, you know, at JPAC. So I think that's basically it from here.
All right. That brings us to the MPAC agenda review. Usually Mayor Rosner does this. Did Mayor Rosner give you anything, Council President Young, to discuss? Nope. All right. That brings us to item number 5, other business and agency updates. As Stephen was mentioning, there will be no August meeting of the coordinating committee, so you get a little bit break there. Are there any topics, hot topics anyone would like to bring up? Any updates that are occurring in their cities? Doesn't look like it. All right. With that, I guess we've completed our business for today. Appreciate you spending your couple hours of the afternoon on this. I have a feeling we're all going to be talking transportation for the next year. So between the cities, the county, the lobbyists, and ODOT, I think we'll hopefully get a successful legislative session in 25 and be well and have our legislators be well informed and have a plan that will work for us to, at all 3 levels, to make our transportation system work quite a bit better and get the funding that we all know we need. And I think good luck in having the legislature give back the kicker. I think that's political suicide for some of them. So, well, we can wish.
We're not giving back the kicker. We're making a flexible budget plan that allows for overages.
All right, Jeff, run for legislature. All right, everyone, we'll have a terrific afternoon, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Have a good time, guys.